Please like this video and subscribe to the channel.
Greetings, family, and welcome back to Raising the Vibe. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please subscribe to the channel and like this video. In my last video, I mentioned that I had recently come across the first book that began to open my eyes to what's going on globally by those who are in control. And so today I want to follow up and share that book with you. It's a book that doesn't appear to be on Amazon. And looking at it, I realized that I went to the store, to Borders in particular, to the bookstore to pick it up in person. The friend who recommended the book to me a little over 10 years ago suggested that I actually go to the bookstore and pay in cash and not buy this online with a credit card, because the information in it at the time was so groundbreaking that one would not want to have an electronic record of having purchased the book. So that's what I did. I went to Borders, which is, a bookstore, in person. I bought the book, and back then it was $29.95, and it was in the metaphysics section. And voila, here's the book, The Biggest Secret by David Icke. And I will say that the information he shares just really opened my eyes and made me think that maybe I needed to start looking at the world in a new way. And to set the stage, back then, I was a pretty devout Christian, a Baptist in particular, but a Christian. I went to church on a weekly basis. I went to Bible study weekly. I took my children to Sunday school. As they got older, they would stay in the sanctuary with me, but we went to church multiple times a week. I was actually part of a ministry where I had a series of books that I was studying and learning from, and going to group meetings and doing projects to delve deeper and become more in line with Christ. That's really what it was. I watched well, not all, but many of the TV evangelists, in particular Joyce Meyer, T.D. Jakes, Joel Osteen. There were a number of them that I watched. And I would say, I have to admit now, that the Joyce Meyer, T.D. Jakes, maybe Jesse Duplantis, there were a lot of them. Oh, there was a black guy. I can't remember his name, but he passed away. A lot of those preachers taught me a lot, or ministers, I guess they are, taught me a lot about believing in myself, about abandoning or banishing negative self-talk, about lifting yourself up, about believing that good things are coming to you. And truthfully, I feel that I got a lot of benefit from them, over and above or despite the religious doctrine that was also involved in watching their ministries. I tithed. I sent those people money. I paid money at the church. I paid a ton of money in tithes. But in reality, it helped to change my life. And so I'm really not going to complain about that. But at the same time, I do now realize, and I did, I have for quite some time now, realize that religion was pure indoctrination, designed to keep us docile and enslaved, in a sense, and to make us put up with the circumstance where the wealthy globalists have everything and enjoy heaven right here on earth, while the rest of us are wage slaves, debt slaves, working ourselves to death with a promise of a heaven somewhere in the future, after we die. So obviously I don't believe that anymore. But looking at this book, I would say that there was so much shocking information in there. I will say that not everything in this book is something that I subscribe to or believe in. But for me, that is not a problem because there is no person that I follow or learn from that I actually agree with 100%. There's always some area in which, or areas in which a person will go off in a direction that doesn't resonate with me. But I know that just because I don't agree with everything a person says, it does not mean that that person doesn't have something that they can teach me. And this is true for David Icke as well. I will also say that there have been rumblings in the so-called conscious, or I guess conscious community, that David Icke is really working for the opposition. Some of that comes from the fact that the level of information he has divulged would have likely gotten anybody else killed. And then some of it is misinformation people believe that he's spreading. So that's a disclaimer. So let's start with the introduction. Right off the bat, in the introduction, David Icke starts telling us about how we're on the cusp of an incredible global change, how there is momentum for, and I'm reading here, the centralized control of global politics, business, banking, military, and media. And so the introduction is telling us that there are a group of people who want to mentally enslave the human race. And he talks about mergers between global banking and business empires and how political and economic control was being centralized through the European Union, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the Multilateral Agreement on Investment, those kinds of global organizations that we're now quite comfortable with. He talked about the Bloodline, which I previously did a video on, and he said that at that time there had been just over 40 presidents and that 33 of them were genetically related to two people, England's King Alfred and the great Charlemagne of France. We have more updated information about that now, which I've shared in a prior video. And he also said, if you want to know what life is going to look like unless we wake up and take action, just take a look at Nazi Germany. He was calling it the Brotherhood Agenda. And so there are two things inherent in that. One is the Brotherhood, which is this intermingling global wealthy bloodline. And then the great agenda, which is to enslave everyone. So this book was actually written in 1999, but the copy I have is an updated second edition, so it was produced after that. And I'm going to share more about this. It's fascinating. It was fascinating to me at the time. But in this introduction, David Icke tells us that the few have always controlled the many, but now the difference is we're looking at the globalization of business, banking, and communications and control. He tells us, of course, that the power is actually with the people, but that in order to utilize it, we have to wake up and realize what's going on. And that, of course, is the purpose of this book, to wake us up. He also talked about, and this is something that we've seen utilized repeatedly, the problem, reaction, solution technique. Really, if you think about it, you see it with the pandemic. They came up with a problem. Many of us speculate that the problem may have been created in a lab. Nevertheless, you have this problem, and then you encourage the reaction that something must be done, something must be done. And then they offer the solution, which is, of course, the way to restore things to their own order, to further promote their agenda. That's what we really have seen with the pandemic. And actually, when one looks back, it's happened over and over and over as this agenda has unfolded and begun to be implemented. I do agree with that. He pointed out that physical control of the global population is not necessary because of mental control. They can manipulate the way people think and feel in order to get them to decide to do what you wanted them to do anyway. He talks about the mind manipulation techniques. This is the introduction, okay? He talks about how he had visited at this time at least 25 different countries and saw the same process in every one of them. Identical political structures and other economic structures are put in place in line with the global agenda that he's talking about. And still at the same time, which we see now too, he mentioned that more and more people were awakening, that he was starting to see a global awakening with more and more people waking up, hearing the spiritual alarm clock, and emerging from their mental and emotional slumber. And I think we have continued to see that, and the evidence is all over the internet of many people who are woke, conscious, aware, enlightened, spreading knowledge. I'm trying to do the same thing here. We're all on a mission to share this information, to plant a seed, to nurture a seed, to wake people up so that we have a fighting chance against the agenda. And so all of this he covered in like a 4-page introduction. Another example of the problem, reaction, solution that he put right in the introduction is, let's say, for example, if you want to erode personal freedom and give more powers to the police and security agencies and military across the globe, and you want the public to demand that you do it, then you just have to ensure that there's more crime, violence, and terrorism. And then you make the people afraid. And they're afraid of being bombed and burgled and mugged. And they will demand that you take their freedom away to protect them from what they have been manipulated to fear. And I do think that that is what we see repeatedly, again, as we have even seen with the pandemic. So in this introduction, he tells us that he's going to chart the history of these interbreeding bloodlines to expose their agenda. And he emphasizes that it's an agenda, not a conspiracy, although there are conspiracies that are part and parcel of the agenda that take 3 forms according to him. The first is conspiring to remove people and organizations that are a threat to the agenda. And as examples, he mentions the assassination of Diana, Princess of Wales. The second part is conspiring to put people into positions of power who will make the agenda happen. And as examples, he gives George Bush, Henry Kissinger, Tony Blair, and so forth. And then the third is conspiring to create events which will make the public demand the agenda is introduced through the problem, reaction, solution paradigm. And then as examples, he mentions wars, terrorist bombs, economic collapses, and that sort of thing. The interesting thing is, after the introduction and before he moves on into the substance of the book, he actually gives you a warning, which I think it's even now still appropriate. I emphasized a portion of it, and I'm going to read that portion to you. He said, warning, there is an enormous amount of challenging information in this book. Please do not continue if you are dependent on your present belief system, or if you feel you cannot cope emotionally with what is really happening in this world. And then all bets are off. He goes on to talk about all manner of things that one would have never expected, that even now one would find hard to believe, but that coming from a perspective of having researched and looked into this over many years now, there are things in here that are just second nature to me that might be new to you. So I'm going to stop now, but we're going to come back from time to time and delve into portions of this book. There are 21 chapters and a couple of appendices, and I think that I probably would want to talk about each chapter and leave you to decide what you think is true and what you think isn't. But all of it is quite interesting and will definitely make you look around and think about things that you previously just took for granted. And that's called critical thinking. That's called being aware. And that's always a good thing. Thank you for joining me, family. I look forward to seeing you on the next video. And until then, peace and love, love and light.